They say money can buy anything except anonymity from the internet. One crisp summer morning, billionaire industrialist David Harrington thought he'd scored the perfect getaway with a bewitching companion half his age. Sunlit waves shimmered behind them in an Instagram post he never dreamed would shatter his life. Within hours, a fiery storm of comments erupted, accusing the mysterious woman of being someone far more dangerous than she appeared. The rumors spiraled into a full-blown expose that threatened not just David's crumbling marriage, but also his image and legacy. In a single click, the world learned that secrets, no matter how well funded, rarely remain buried. David Harrington had always been a man who commanded attention the instant he walked into a room. At 6 feet 2 inches, with tailored suits that seemed to drape his athletic frame flawlessly, he radiated a polished self-assurance cultivated over decades of hard work and strategic gambles. Born in Chicago to a middle-class family, David displayed an early flair for numbers and negotiation. By the time he was in college, he'd already built 2 small businesses, one reselling refurbished laptops out of his dorm, and another importing artisanal leather wallets from Italy. He was a hustler in the best sense of the word, unrelenting in his pursuit of prosperity. When he turned 25, David took his biggest risk yet. He convinced an angel investor named Richard Carmichael, a man revered for his savvy in emerging markets, to pour $500,000 into a software automation startup David co-founded. It was an audacious move, especially in a market saturated with bigger, more established players. But David's persuasion worked. Within 18 months, the startup was acquired by a larger tech conglomerate, netting David his first major fortune. It was the start of an illustrious career that would see him founding or funding a series of successful ventures into technology, real estate, and even renewable energy. By his mid-30s, David Harrington was wealthy beyond imagination, yet his ambition burned brighter. He was rarely satisfied. Gone were the days of renting modest apartments and living on fast food. He now presided over a sprawling empire, complete with offices in New York, London, Singapore, and Sao Paulo. He jetted around the globe for business deals, indulging in the high-life trappings, private yachts membership at exclusive clubs, and a mansion perched atop the Hollywood Hills with a ski-line view that glittered like diamonds at night. But hidden beneath the aura of success was a restless void. He was married, yes, to the beautiful and accomplished Sarah Whitmore. They met at a charity event in Los Angeles, bonding over a shared passion for philanthropy. Sarah, an Ivy League-educated lawyer turned environmental activist, had grown up in a similarly middle-class background. She understood David's drive and matched him in intellect. For a while they seemed the ultimate power couple, publicly philanthropic, privately fierce in their love and ambitions. However, time and relentless pursuit of more money placed stress cracks in their marriage. David's constant travel, late-night negotiations, and if rumors were to be believed, unstoppable appetite for new experiences, all weighed heavily on Sarah. As David's orbit expanded, she found herself increasingly sidelined, overshadowed by the gravitational pull of his ambitions. Even the philanthropic causes they once championed together were neglected. David wrote the checks, but rarely bothered to attend the galas or volunteer events anymore. By the time he was in his early 40s, the heart of their relationship had eroded, replaced by polite tolerance and carefully orchestrated public appearances. That was the environment in which David would eventually make a series of decisions, culminating in the scandal that would rock his world. Fueled by ego and weary of the stale comfort his marriage had devolved into, he sought excitement elsewhere. He believed he was untouchable, convinced his well-oiled team of advisors and the iron curtain of wealth could conceal any indiscretions. But David Harrington was about to learn one of life's harshest truths in the digital era. Every secret has a lifespan. All it takes is a single post for an empire's pristine facade to come crashing down. Sarah Whitmore Harrington was no stranger to adversity. Raised by a single mother in a modest Chicago neighborhood, she thrived academically, eventually securing a full scholarship to Columbia University. While her classmates carried designer purses and took spring breaks in Europe, Sarah juggled part-time jobs at coffee shops and university libraries. She took pride in her self-reliance, never shying away from hard work and rigorous study. By her mid-20s, Sarah was practicing corporate law at a prestigious Manhattan firm. She was brilliant, resilient, and notably empathetic. Those qualities caught the attention of an internal pro bono committee, which led her to champion several environmental cases against big corporations. Her compassion for the underdog and her deep sense of justice made her a formidable foe in legal negotiations. She even won a high-profile lawsuit that forced a major chemical company to pay millions in damages to a marginalized community. The victory made headlines, and from that moment, Sarah became recognized not just as a skilled lawyer, but as a warrior for ethical responsibility. That was how she met David at a black tie fundraiser in Los Angeles, where he presented a sizable check to the environmental organization she represented. The sparks flew instantly. In him, she saw a titan with an innate gift for making money, and an equally fervent philanthropic side, an individual who could potentially reshape industries for the better. In her, he saw a steadfast spirit, beautiful both inside and out, and a partner whose intellect could match his. Their courtship was whirlwind. They dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, attended exclusive events, and traveled abroad to meet potential charity partners in places like Nairobi and Mumbai. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish beach ceremony in Maui, complete with dignitaries, celebrities, and the who's who of venture capital in attendance. However, the transition from newlyweds to a stable marriage was rocky. David's businesses, spread across multiple sectors, demanded constant attention and travel. Meanwhile, Sarah transitioned from corporate law to running her own not-for-profit legal consultancy for environmental issues, an endeavor that required significant energy and focus. They saw each other less and less. The times they did manage to reconnect were overshadowed by David's phone calls, emails, and text notifications. Despite the cracks in their relationship, Sarah believed she still knew David better than anyone else. She sensed when he was exhausted, recognized when his bravado was merely a cover for deeper anxieties. She also recognized as his success soared to new heights that he was falling into certain patterns, seeking novelty, losing interest in things that once mattered, constantly pushing boundaries. But she never quite dared to voice her growing suspicions. She wanted to preserve their public image, and more critically, she didn't want to face the reality that her husband might be cheating. Then the subtle shifts started. David became secretive about his phone, quickly changing screens when she walked by. He started going on business trips to places that made no sense, or at times that were uncharacteristic for the industries he worked in. Once Sarah found a diamond bracelet in his study desk, one that was clearly not for her, as she had never once expressed interest in that style, nor had he gifted her something similar in years. She brushed it off, attributing it to a possible gift for a female investor or sponsor. But deep down, she suspected. Sarah thought about confronting him multiple times, yet her pride held her back. In her mind, relationships were built on honesty and trust, but confronting David without proof felt like a betrayal of her self-respect. She wanted certainty. She needed to be sure. In the quiet corners of her soul, she wondered if it might be easier to look away, to focus on her philanthropic work, and to let David chase his illusions. After all, they maintained a semblance of stability. They weren't short on money. Her beloved mother was comfortable living in a gorgeous townhouse that Sarah and David financed. On the surface, her life seemed perfect. But as the months rolled on, Sarah felt a gathering storm, an anxiety that gnawed at her. Something in her marriage and David was shifting. For all her accomplishments, for all her unwavering character, she was powerless to stop whatever was happening. A sense of impending disaster loomed. She could almost hear the faint thunderclap on the horizon. She just didn't know how or when it would strike, only that it was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. David Harrington first laid eyes on Layla St. James at a private art exhibit in Soho. The event was one of those exclusive gatherings of the ultra-wealthy and avant-garde, a place to see and be seen. She stood in front of a painting, a swirl of neon colors, something abstract and disorienting, and seemed lost in thought. She wore a simple yet elegant emerald green dress, her tawny hair falling in loose waves down her back. David was immediately intrigued by her aura of quiet confidence. He approached her fully expecting that easy spark he often found in conversations. Layla, however, surprised him. She greeted him with polite warmth, but spoke with a self-assuredness and intellectual depth that caught him off guard. She was not overly impressed by his status or money. At least she didn't show it in the usual fawning way. Instead, she asked him questions about his philanthropic endeavors, referencing a literacy program in Southeast Asia that David's foundation had once funded. Few people outside his close circle even knew about that. It was an obscure project, overshadowed by his more flashy contributions. Fascinated by her knowledge, he pressed further. Layla revealed she was an art historian by training, had worked in Europe's auction circuit, and recently moved to New York to pursue her own gallery aspirations. She claimed she had grown tired of the pretentiousness in traditional art circles and wanted to start a space that embraced both established and emerging artists. Over a cocktail in the exhibit's VIP lounge, Layla recounted travel stories from her time in Paris, how she'd negotiated million-dollar deals for rare impressionist works. Her voice dripped with a delicate, almost musical accent. David couldn't quite place a mix, she said, from traveling around the world. In the weeks that followed, they exchanged numbers. David found himself texting Layla at odd hours discussing art-world politics and eventually drifting into flirtation. Layla reciprocated, sprinkling their conversations with subtle compliments and innuendo that kept David on his toes. It felt like a dance one that David had not experienced in a long time. Sarah had once been his intellectual equal, but now their discussions were overshadowed by property deals, lawsuits, and superficial gatherings. Layla offered something new, something fresh. Their first real date came under the guise of a business meeting at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Midtown. David told himself he was merely exploring philanthropic collaboration, maybe funding an art initiative Layla had proposed. But by dessert, they were lost in each other's eyes. A wave of guilt threatened to crash over David, but he quelled it with a glass of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, rationalizing that he deserved happiness. Life was too short, and he had worked too hard. If he couldn't indulge once in a while, what was the point of all this success? Days turned into weeks, and he found every excuse to see Layla. A hotel suite at the Pierre, a weekend in the Hamptons. David claimed he had an urgent real estate matter to attend to. Layla was always there, radiant, engaging, confident in her allure. But there was something else about her, a certain mystery that David couldn't pinpoint. She rarely spoke about her family or past relationships. She was cagey whenever he asked about the specifics of her work in Europe. His curiosity was piqued, but the thrill of their clandestine encounters overshadowed any red flags. In private moments, Layla would talk about the future, teasing a world where they might be more public in their romance. David smiled, uncertain if he could ever cross that line. He was still tethered by a marriage that he had not fully admitted was over. Yet Layla's world was intoxicating and like a moth drawn to flame. He ignored the risk. The more David's desire grew, the more brazen he became about their affair. Eventually, a reckless idea took shape in his mind. He had a beachside villa in Belize that was rarely used. Perhaps a little tropical escape was just what they needed. Sun, sand, and secrecy far from prying eyes. Layla loved the idea, squealing with excitement at the notion of turquoise waters and private cabanas. They decided on a date, making hush-hush travel plans through David's private jet. In David's mind, this was a contained fantasy, a secret paradise sealed away from the rest of his life. No one would ever know. They would be safe to indulge, if only for a few days. He should have remembered that secrets don't stay buried forever. And with social media's insatiable appetite for drama, a single misstep could set off a chain reaction he'd never see coming. The villa in Belize was a pristine haven surrounded by palm trees, with a private stretch of powdery white sand extending into azure waters. It was the kind of place people only see in glossy travel magazines, one David rarely got to enjoy, thanks to his busy schedule. Layla's eyes sparkled when they arrived. She ran to the ocean's edge, letting the warm waves lap at her feet. David watched her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Somewhere in the recesses of his conscience, a small voice asked, "Is this worth it?" He silenced it, enticed by the vision of Layla on the beach. Each morning they lounged under canopied daybeds, sipping tropical cocktails and listening to the rhythmic crash of waves. David felt more alive than he had in years. He indulged in Layla's laughter, her spontaneous dances in the sand, the ways she made him forget about corporate boardrooms and stifling responsibilities. This was freedom, no obligations, no routine, just the two of them enjoying life's simple pleasures. On the second day, after a lazy breakfast of fresh mangoes and coffee, Layla teased David with a challenge. "Let's take a picture, something special to remember this trip by." David hesitated. He had always maintained a strict no social media posts policy when it came to his private affairs. But the sunlight was dancing off the ocean, and Layla looked radiant in her turquoise bikini. She draped herself across a beach lounger, beckoning him closer. David relented, pulling out his phone. He snapped a few pictures of them together. Layla's head on his chest, the glimmering ocean behind them. Laughing, they flipped through the shots, choosing their favorites. Layla posted a couple of photos on her own discreet account set to private. She had only a handful of followers, mostly art world acquaintances, she said. David shrugged, telling himself that a handful of people with no ties to his life wouldn't make a difference. Still, he felt a pang of anxiety at the possibility of any slip. Emboldened by the day's carefree vibe, David grew reckless. Late that evening, after a lavish dinner prepared by the villa's private chef, Layla pressed herself against him and giggled. "Let's show off just a bit. Let's make them jealous." She grabbed his phone and teased him with an Instagram story post. "Just a quick shot of the sunset," she said, with a silhouette of them toasting wine glasses. She promised it wouldn't give away too much. "No faces, no location tags," she whispered. Caught up in the evening's romantic intoxication, David acquiesced. He posted it. The immediate response from his followers was mild. People admired the sunset, the luxurious atmosphere. But within minutes, eagle-eyed fans began to notice small details, the shape of a woman's figure in the reflection of the glass door, the second wine glass in David's hand. A few commented, enjoying a romantic getaway. David, others posted heart emojis and asked, "Where's Sarah?" That was the first red flag. David ignored it, telling himself it was harmless speculation. The next morning, in a haze of euphoria, David made a grave mistake. While Layla was frolicking in the waves, he snapped a candid shot of her, capturing her face in profile, then posted it to his main feed with a cryptic caption, "A moment of peace in paradise." He truly believed it was ambiguous enough that no one would identify her. He never tagged her account, never mentioned her name. But the internet has a way of connecting the dots. Within minutes, the post garnered thousands of likes. Then came the comments, some supportive, many curious, a few, laced with suspicion. A handful of David's close friends texted him directly. "Who is she?" Some used winking emojis, half joking. Others were more direct, worried that this could blow back on him if Sarah saw it. Unperturbed, David turned off his phone notifications, wanting to stay in their bubble of paradise a little while longer. It was on the final day of their trip that reality began to intrude. Unbeknownst to David, a tabloid blogger had recognized Layla's face from a rumor that had circulated in certain high society circles, an art dealer with a dubious past, rumored to seduce wealthy clients, rumored to have left Europe under a cloud of scandal. The blogger had ties to gossip circles across the globe and had access to hush-hush sources in the European art scene. By the time David and Layla boarded his private jet for the return flight to New York, the blogger was already working on an exposé cross-referencing images and combing through digital footprints. The seeds of disaster were planted, and neither David nor Layla had any clue that a social media storm was brewing. They touched down in New York that evening, stepping back into a world that would soon turn on them with alarming speed. For David, the beach vacation was a blissful memory. For the internet, it became the catalyst for a scandal that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his mistress, his marriage, and even himself. When David checked his phone after landing, he noticed a barrage of missed calls and frantic texts, primarily from his closest business associates and his public relations officer, Jacqueline Nguyen. His heart pounded as he glanced at the notifications. Typically, such a flurry of calls indicated a major development, a collapsed deal, maybe a crisis in one of his overseas offices. But as he skimmed through them, he realized the panic was personal, not professional. "David, call me ASAP." One text from Jacqueline read, "We have a problem on Instagram." Confused and apprehensive, he dialed Jacqueline's number. She picked up immediately, her voice strained. "David, you need to delete that post right now," she blurted before he could speak. "Calm down, Jackie." He attempted trying to maintain composure. "What's going on?" She launched into a rapid-fire explanation. "Your post with that woman on the beach." Someone recognized her. Comments are exploding. There's a rumor swirling that she's a con artist who allegedly scammed an art collector in Paris. People are sharing screenshots, old articles, everything. It's going viral. They're calling her the art world grifter. This is beyond just an affair rumor. This could turn into a full-blown scandal. David's head spun. He had braced himself for gossip about a potential mistress, but allegations of criminal activity took the situation to an entirely different level. He ended the call immediately, opened Instagram, and gaped at the flood of comments. Many asked, Is that Layla St. James? Others claimed she was wanted for questioning in Europe. Some linked to half-baked investigative pieces from obscure blogs. And then there were the moral judgments, David Harrington. How could you cheat on your wife with a criminal respect lost? Hypocrite. A real philanthropist wouldn't be with a con artist. Layla, who was seated beside him in his chauffeured car, scrolled through her own phone. He could see the color drain from her face. "David, we need to talk," she whispered, voice shaky. Not willing to address the situation in the car, he texted his driver to head to one of his discreet penthouse properties in Manhattan. He couldn't go home to his mansion. Sarah was likely there, and a confrontation now would be disastrous. Layla's expression was that of panic fused with indignation. "I don't understand why they're saying these things," she kept muttering. "I'm not a criminal." She tried to show him what she claimed were legitimate references from her past employers, though David barely glanced at them. Once they arrived at the penthouse, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Layla collapsed onto a plush sofa. David paced phone in hand, reading through messages from colleagues, PR consultants, and even lawyers. His empire was built on a carefully curated image of competence and ethics. Any hint of scandal could harm investor confidence. And the fact that Sarah, widely respected in legal and philanthropic circles, might soon find out, was another ticking bomb. "I need you to tell me everything," David demanded, voice taut with urgency. "Why are people calling you a grifter? Were you accused of something in Europe? Tell me now, Layla." She exhaled, trembling. "I never scammed anyone. I was involved with a wealthy French collector. Yes, but I left because he was controlling and abusive. He spread rumors about me to cover his tracks. I never faced any charges. None of it is true." David studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. He had believed her wholeheartedly until this moment, but now his instincts sounded alarms. Something in her eyes. Was it fear, or was it guilt? The swirling chaos of the moment made it hard to read. A sense of betrayal and dread took hold of him. He realized that even if Layla was innocent, the public didn't care. Gossip and scandal had already latched onto them. The internet feeds on controversy, and they had served it up on a silver platter. The damage might already be done. Over the next few hours, David's crisis management team mobilized. He engaged his top-notch legal counsel, pressing them to craft a statement denying any criminal association. Jacqueline orchestrated a digital damage control strategy, locking down comments, removing the offending post, and issuing official disclaimers that any claims about Layla's criminal background were unsubstantiated rumors. But the internet had already taken screenshots. The post lived on in countless retweets and reshares. Worse still, the mainstream media was picking it up now. A celebrity gossip show ran a segment featuring the blurred-out images of David and Layla on the beach with a dramatic voiceover billionaire, David Harrington's rumored Mistress international con artist, or misunderstood muse. Speculative headlines mushroomed across tabloids, often accompanied by pictures of Sarah, his wronged wife looking stoic and poised at past charity events. On top of everything, phone calls from Sarah began lighting up David's screen. He couldn't bring himself to answer. His mind whirled in panic, trying to figure out how to spin this. He composed text after text to Sarah, erasing them before sending any. There was no easy way to explain. Perhaps the best he could do was beg for her forgiveness and attempt some sort of damage limitation. David, Layla said softly, breaking the tense silence. "I need you to believe me. I'm not who they say I am." He looked at her, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We'll figure this out." He managed, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. But the question that truly haunted him was, had he been duped? And if so, was it just by a cunning seductress, or also by his own naive desire for excitement and novelty? The answer wouldn't remain hidden for long. The internet had taken hold of this scandal, and soon even darker revelations would surface, forcing David to confront secrets far more devastating than an affair. While David and Layla tried to contain the inferno in Manhattan, Sarah Harrington was at home, feeling as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. Initially, she had ignored the handful of texts from friends, hinting at David's suspicious Instagram post. She was used to rumors. But then her best friend, Monica Alvarez, sent a message that rattled her. "Please check the tabloids." "I'm so sorry, Sarah." With shaky hands, Sarah clicked a link Monica had forwarded. She saw David's Instagram post, the silhouette of a woman on a beach, and the avalanche of salacious comments and allegations. Her first reaction was numbness, an eerie calm that spread through her limbs. She had suspected David might be unfaithful, but seeing it unfold publicly was a different kind of pain. An hour later, her phone buzzed again. It was her mother, distressed and confused about the swirling rumors. Embarrassment flooded Sarah, a hot flush crawling up her cheeks. She assured her mother she was fine, even though her heart felt as if it were cracking in half. She forced herself to remain steady, telling her mother not to believe everything she read online. But the numbness soon gave way to anger, then heartbreak, then an odd sense of relief. At least now the rumors were in the open. No more doubts, no more illusions. She spent the next few hours pacing the living room, rereading old messages from David, analyzing their marriage from every angle. She felt a mixture of betrayal and odd detachment, as though she were hovering above herself, watching it all unfold from a distance. A short while later, David's chauffeur arrived at the mansion, dropping off a large black envelope. Sarah took it, opened it, and found legal documents inside, some half-baked statements from David's attorneys, disclaimers about the alleged mistress's background, and an apologetic note that ended with, "Please do not speak to the press. I will explain everything." There was no real apology, no admission of guilt. Just corporate-sounding instructions. It was like receiving a memo from a CEO to a subordinate, rather than a heartfelt message from a husband to his wife. Furious, she called David multiple times, but each attempt went to voicemail. She left a single message. "You owe me an explanation. David, I'm not some PR problem to be handled." Then she hung up, refusing to try again. That evening, as she attempted to navigate the swirling confusion, she received another unexpected visitor. Michael Whitmore, her cousin and fellow attorney, who also worked for a prestigious Los Angeles firm. Michael was in New York on business and had seen the online furore. He arrived unannounced, a supportive presence Sarah desperately needed. They sat in the living room, the mansion feeling too large, too grand for the gloom enveloping it. Sarah poured them both glasses of wine, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She recounted the situation, her suspicions, the damning Instagram post, the rumors about the mistress's criminal past. She felt exposed, humiliated. Michael listened patiently, asking pointed questions. "So this woman Layla might be a con artist," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Do we know if it's true?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know anything anymore. I thought I knew David, but now I'm not so sure." Michael offered a thoughtful nod. "Look, Sarah, I can help you. Legally. We can figure out your options, whether it's a separation, a divorce, or simply negotiations for your protection. You shouldn't trust his attorneys. They'll protect him first." Sarah sighed, leaning back into the sofa's cushions. "I appreciate that, but I need time to think. My marriage is on the line, and if this woman really is dangerous, I don't want to rush into any decisions I'll regret." Michael placed his hand over hers. "I understand. But be cautious. Men like David with power and money can become unpredictable under pressure. Do what you must to protect yourself emotionally, legally, financially." That night, Sarah tried to sleep, but nightmares plagued her images of David and Layla on a beach swirling tabloids and faceless gossipers pointing fingers at her. The next morning, she decided she wouldn't be silent. If David wouldn't provide clarity, she would find it on her own. She scheduled a meeting with her own legal advisors, ignoring the suggestion in David's letter to remain quiet. She reached out to her charitable partners, confirming that she would continue her activism work, regardless of the scandal. The last thing she needed was for her philanthropic efforts to be overshadowed by her husband's affair. Amid the emotional turmoil, a flicker of her old resolve appeared. Sarah refused to let David's betrayal define her. If anything, it fortified her determination. If the woman in the scandal truly was a con artist, Sarah intended to expose the lies. And if the rumors were false, she would force David to explain why he had put her through this mortifying ordeal. From that point on, Sarah began her own quiet investigation. Friends in the art world, acquaintances in legal networks across Europe, she reached out to anyone who might have a lead on Layla St. James. She had no illusions that discovering the truth would fix her marriage, but at least she wouldn't be a passive spectator to her own humiliation. Little did she know her search for answers would set off the next wave of revelations, drawing her into a labyrinth of secrets deeper and more twisted than she could have ever imagined. Back at David's penthouse, tension hung in the air like a stagnant fog. Layla paced the living room, her phone constantly buzzing with text messages and calls. She ignored most, focusing instead on David, who was huddled over his laptop in a makeshift war room arrangement with his PR team via video conference. The official statements they had released weren't silencing the rumors. If anything, the chatter online seemed to grow louder, especially on niche art world forums. Jacqueline's voice crackled through the laptop speakers. "David, we have to address these allegations head-on. We found some references to Layla's possible involvement with a French collector named Jean-Louis Moreau. He's rumored to have lost a significant sum purchasing forgeries from an unknown intermediary, someone described as an attractive American woman. Some people are linking that story to Layla. We need to refute this or confirm it." "Refute it?" Layla interjected, indignation flaring in her eyes. "It's a smear campaign by a bitter ex. I've told David this already." David sighed. "Do we have any evidence that you didn't do these things?" "Layla." "Something official? Legal documents proving your innocence?" She glowered, crossing her arms. "I never faced formal charges. That's all the proof I have." Jacqueline's voice softened. "That's not enough for the court of public opinion. They want something concrete." With a heavy sigh, David ended the call, promising to regroup later. He turned to face Layla, who was hugging herself defensively. "I need the truth," he said quietly. "I'm not accusing you, but if there's any detail you left out, I need to know." Her eyes flickered. Then she told him her story. Layla claimed she had indeed worked with Jean-Louis Moreau, one of France's most influential collectors, who hired her to help him scout and acquire valuable pieces. According to Layla, Jean-Louis was arrogant and manipulative, eventually pressuring her into a toxic affair. As she tried to distance herself professionally and personally, Jean-Louis began to sabotage her reputation, planting rumors of forgery and fraud. Layla insisted she had zero involvement in any wrongdoing and fled Europe after receiving threats from Jean-Louis' associates. She'd been attempting to rebuild her life in New York, severing all ties with that dark chapter. David listened, half wanting to believe her. The story was plausible enough. Rich men had used their influence to destroy someone's reputation before. But a nagging doubt remained. Layla was still omitting details. "What about the rumors you drugged him and stole money?" David asked, referencing a particularly sensational claim circulating online. Her cheeks reddened. Utter lies. Fabricated. "I don't do drugs. I hardly even drink. I've never stolen a cent from anyone in my life. Don't you see, he's punishing me because I left him." David studied her trembling lip, the tears welling in her eyes. He wanted to comfort her, to accept her story at face value. But the stakes were too high. His empire was in jeopardy, and if Layla was hiding something, the fallout could be catastrophic. Yet the thought of losing her, the excitement she brought into his life, filled him with dread. So he decided to proceed cautiously, choosing to believe her for the moment, but resolved to do his own thorough checks. He called in favors from private investigators he had used in corporate deals. Within hours, they began scouring European legal records, court documents, and any traces of Layla's past, all while David prepared for the next wave of media scrutiny. The scandal showed no signs of abating. Then, in a surprising twist, David's phone rang with a call from none other than Jean-Louis Moreau himself. A few months prior, David had made casual acquaintance with Moreau at a Monaco charity event. Now the French collector was reaching out directly, presumably, to discuss the fiasco. With Layla fidgeting nervously nearby, David accepted the call. On speaker, Jean-Louis' accented voice flowed smoothly. "Ah, Monsieur Harrington. I see we have a common acquaintance." David cleared his throat. "Apparently so. I'd like to get to the bottom of this. You're aware of the rumors." A condescending chuckle crackled over the speaker. "Rumors, yes. But they are not rumors, monsieur. The woman you call Layla St. James, if that's her real name, defrauded me. She introduced me to forged artwork, manipulated me emotionally, then disappeared with large commissions. I have evidence. I attempted legal action, but she slipped away." Layla blanched, shaking her head vehemently at David. David pressed. "She claims you invented these lies because she ended a personal relationship with you." A harsh laugh erupted from Jean-Louis. "Personal relationship? She seduced me for one purpose, to gain access to my network and my finances. I warn you, Harrington, this is a dangerous woman. She is skilled at deception. If you continue to involve yourself with her, your name, your empire, both will burn." The call ended abruptly. Layla broke into tears, insisting Jean-Louis was lying, that he was the manipulator. David stood there, torn. On one hand, he despised Jean-Louis's smug tone and recognized how men of power often rewrite history to blame women. On the other, the man's conviction was chilling. Could it all be true? David's private investigators would soon deliver a preliminary report, but the emotional stakes were skyrocketing. If Layla was innocent, David would stand by her. If she was guilty, he risked his fortune, his reputation, everything. And all the while, Sarah loomed in the background, her silence perhaps more threatening than any media outlet. That night, David slept fitfully plagued by dreams of forging art and forging love, unable to discern which illusions were real. Little did he know the truth would be more complicated and more shocking than he could ever anticipate. By the following morning, David's investigators had sent a cryptic message. "We have substantial findings. Meeting recommended." He arranged for them to come to the penthouse, carefully scheduling it when Layla would be out. She had departed earlier to clear her head, though David wondered if she was actually meeting someone else. Just after noon, two stoic men in suits arrived, introducing themselves as Morgan Harris and Philip Zhao. David led them into the study, shutting the door behind them. Their expressions were grim. Morgan began. "Mr. Harrington, we've identified two separate legal dockets in Paris and Brussels that involve an American woman with a similar profile to Ms. St. James. The name used was not Layla St. James, but Linda McPherson." Same initials, LM Philip continued. "The charges were dropped in one case and settled out of court in another. Both involved allegations of art fraud and misrepresentation. The documents list an unidentified male accomplice." David leaned forward, his pulse pounding. "Are we sure this is the same woman?" Morgan nodded. "We have a 78% facial recognition match between photos from archived news articles and the images you provided us of Ms. St. James. A strong likelihood it's her." A nauseating dread coursed through David's veins. "Any sign of Jean-Louis Moreau's involvement?" Philip replied. "He's mentioned in the Brussels docket as a complaining witness. The details were sealed, but we suspect a settlement was reached behind closed doors." David sank into his chair, his mind a kaleidoscope of betrayal and rage. He thought of confronting Layla, but a text on his phone interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Unknown number. "If you want to keep certain secrets from your wife and the public, it'll cost you $5 million. Wire instructions to follow." Accompanying the text was a single photograph, a candid shot of David and Layla in an intimate moment on the Belize beach, far more revealing than anything posted on social media. Clearly, someone had been photographing them. The angle suggested a drone or a long-range camera. And now they wanted money. David clenched his jaw. "I'm being blackmailed," he growled, showing Morgan and Philip the text. They exchanged worried looks, cautioning David not to make any hasty moves. This could be linked to Ms. St. James's alleged accomplice, Morgan offered. "We've seen this pattern before." Seething, David dismissed them. He needed a plan. A quiet hush money payment would only encourage more extortion down the line. Yet ignoring the threat could lead to even greater exposure. And the worst part was the growing suspicion that Layla herself might be part of this scheme, another elaborate con. But a flicker of doubt lingered. Perhaps Layla truly was a victim, and her old accomplice was extorting them both. He decided he needed to corner Layla that very evening. No more half-truths or evasion. He wanted her entire story. If she lied or faltered, he'd cut her off and let the legal system do its worst. But if she persuaded him of her innocence, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could face this together. Hours later, Layla returned. David wasted no time. "We need to talk," he said curtly, leading her into the study. She looked apprehensive, eyes darting to the closed door. He showed her the blackmail text and the incriminating photo. He then presented the investigative report, the name Linda McPherson, the out-of-court settlements. With every piece of information, Layla's face paled further. When he finished, an uneasy silence settled. Layla's lips quivered. Then she began to speak, voice trembling. "I'm not Linda McPherson. That was my sister." A new tale spilled forth, each revelation more shocking than the last. Layla insisted she had a twin sister raised separately after a messy divorce in her childhood. The sister was the one who got entangled with Jean-Louis, forging art and leveraging Layla's identity. Layla claimed she tried to help her sister out of the mess, but it spiraled beyond control. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I fled to America to escape that chaos. My sister threatened to drag me down with her. I changed my name legally to distance myself from her record. David, I swear I've never defrauded anyone. I thought you'd never understand, so I kept it hidden. David's mind reeled. The idea of a twin, a doppelganger who could have orchestrated these crimes, sounded outrageous, but not impossible. Layla sobbed, claiming her sister was the blackmailer, the one who had been snapping secret photos and demanding money. She's punishing me for leaving her behind, for not bailing her out again. The story was so elaborate, so twisted. David's gut wrenched with conflicting emotions. The puzzle pieces fit a little too well, yet Layla's tears seemed genuine. He remembered how she had always been vague about her family, how frightened she seemed whenever he asked about her past. Could this all be real? Wrestling with his doubts, David found himself making a decision based on a precarious blend of logic and emotion. If what you're saying is true, we need proof, he said, voice stern. We'll involve my investigators. We'll find your sister, and we'll end this blackmail. Layla nodded, relieved. Whatever it takes. I'll do anything. A fragile truce formed between them that night. David, driven by a potent mix of fear, pride, and infatuation, chose to believe Layla at least temporarily. He vowed to protect her from the blackmailer, from the swirling rumors, from everything. Yet in the darkness of the penthouse, as Layla slept fitfully in the next room, David stared out the window at the glowing city lights, wondering if he'd just made the greatest mistake of his life. While David grappled with the twin sister revelation, Sarah conducted her own inquiry, determined to uncover the truth about Layla St. James. Through her legal network, she managed to contact a renowned French attorney named René Fournier, who had once handled a high-profile art fraud case involving Jean-Louis Moreau. Via a series of lengthy email exchanges, Sarah pieced together a confounding puzzle. According to René, there had indeed been an American woman at the center of the Moreau scandal. Someone who used multiple aliases, among them Linda and Layla. Official documents were sealed, but rumors suggested the woman had an accomplice, possibly a family member. René also hinted that the entire fiasco nearly extended into a broader European crime syndicate. But before any formal charges could stick, the woman vanished. Moreau had enough influence to keep the scandal out of mainstream news, presumably to save face. But the rumor mill churned relentlessly behind closed doors. Sarah's instincts told her that David's mistress had some connection to that case, but she wanted concrete proof. She scrolled through obscure websites, reading half-legible Google translations of French tabloids looking for any mention of sisters or twins. Then she stumbled on a small blog post from years ago that mentioned a sibling duo suspected of art forgery, one rumored to be involved with Moreau. The post cited no official documents, but the narrative was eerily similar to Layla's story. Frustrated, yet fueled by this partial validation, Sarah pressed further. She reached out to an old law school acquaintance in Brussels, who was now a mid-level judicial clerk. Within a day, the acquaintance confirmed that sealed records existed involving a Linda Macpherson, but he couldn't access details without risking his career. He did, however, confirm the mention of a sister in the sealed complaint. Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Layla might indeed have a twin, a partner in crime, or a separate individual entirely. Either possibility spelled trouble for David, and by extension, Sarah. If Layla had roped David into a blackmail scheme, the scandal could destroy his reputation and the philanthropic work Sarah herself cherished. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in an even more unexpected way. Late one afternoon, Sarah received a cryptic text from a number labeled Unknown. Meet me at the Green Leaf Cafe on 5th. I have information about Layla. Come alone. A friend. Wary of a trap. Sarah nearly ignored it, but curiosity and a desire to protect herself compelled her to go. She arrived at the cafe, a cozy, dimly lit space, scanning the patrons nervously. A tall, lean man in a baseball cap stood and waved her over. As she approached, he took off the cap, revealing salt and pepper hair. She recognized him vaguely from a magazine cover, Jean-Louis Moreau. Her heart hammered as she sat down, unsure how to proceed. Moreau spoke first, his English tinged with a delicate accent. Mrs. Harrington, thank you for coming. I apologize for the clandestine approach, but we share a common predicament. She regarded him with cold caution. You claim to have information about Layla St. James. His lips curled into a faint smile. Or Linda McPherson, or whatever she calls herself these days. Sarah's breath caught. So it's true. Moreau leaned in. I contacted your husband, but he seems enamored by her. Or perhaps she's convinced him of a sob story. Either way, he is not receptive. But you, Mrs. Harrington, you have more at stake if this escalates further. He slid an envelope across the table. Sarah opened it to find printed emails, photographs, documents linking Layla to a series of art deals with suspicious authenticity. One photo showed a woman identical to Layla holding hands with a second woman, a near doppelganger. Another picture captured them in front of a Belgian art gallery, rumored to deal in forgeries. The timestamps suggested these were from a few years ago. Proof of her partnership with her twin, who is equally cunning. Moreau explained. They swindled me and they swindled others. I want them both to face justice. But your husband is in the way, blindly protecting her. Sarah felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, bitterness, heartbreak, and a strange sense of vindication. Part of her wanted to lash out at David. Part of her wanted to pity him. She also wondered what Moreau expected from her. Moreau eyed her. I need your help. Influence your husband to break ties with her. If he continues to shield her, she will only drag him further into the mud. And I suspect her sister lurks in the shadows, planning something bigger. Perhaps the blackmail we are hearing about Sarah, swallowed hard. What do you get out of this? His brow furrowed. Closure, justice, and the chance to salvage what's left of my reputation in Europe. Also a certain moral satisfaction in knowing these sisters don't dupe anyone else. They parted ways with a tense handshake. Sarah clutched the envelope as if it were a time bomb. Her marriage had been on the brink of collapse, but this new knowledge gave her a sense of responsibility. She had to warn David, if only to protect him from sinking deeper into a catastrophic scandal. She also felt a measure of compassion. Despite his betrayal, David was still the man she once loved, and no matter how furious she felt, she didn't want him ruined by these manipulations. That night she found herself driving to David's penthouse, not entirely sure how she would approach the subject. The envelope of evidence sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. She thought of all the ways this meeting could go. Would David believe her? Would Layla be there, spitting venom at Sarah's intrusion? One thing was certain: the next steps she took could determine the fate of both their futures and possibly save David from the greatest betrayal of his life. Sarah arrived at David's penthouse just after dusk, her nerves taut with urgency. The doorman let her in, without question. As she stepped off the private elevator, she found David pacing the living room phone clutched in hand. He froze when he saw her guilt, relief, and dread flashing across his face. "Sarah," he began. She raised a hand. "I know everything. I'm here to stop you from making a terrible mistake." Without another word, she extended the envelope Jean-Louis Moreau had given her. David took it, flipped through its contents, photographs of Layla and her twin emails detailing suspicious art deals and banking documents that hinted at blackmail. His face tightened with disbelief. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. "From Moreau," Sarah said. "He claims Layla and her sister ran a sophisticated art scam, and now she's entangled you in it." David looked stunned. "Layla told me her sister set her up, that she's the victim here." "She also told you she'd be honest with investigators," Sarah countered. "Did she ever show you this?" She pointed to a photo of Layla and her sister, exchanging a thick envelope, both smiling. Before David could reply, Layla stepped out of a side room. Her hair was tousled, her eyes burning. "You're working with that man, Sarah. That manipulative monster." Sarah didn't flinch. "You've been hiding too much. If you're innocent, prove it. I was trying to protect David." Layla cried. "My sister threatened us both. I didn't plan to fall in love, but I did." Everything changed. Before David could react, Layla's phone buzzed. She paled, then bolted toward her bag. Her belongings spilled across the floor, lipstick's wallet and a folded note. Sarah snatched it up. "Swiss wire transfer instructions," she read aloud. "Is this your sister's next payment?" Layla's defenses crumbled. "I was going to handle it. I didn't want David dragged through this." "So you'd rather pay hush money than tell the truth?" Sarah's voice was tight with disgust. David stared at Layla, torn between fury and heartbreak. "You told me we were into this together, but you lied again. I had to." Layla shouted, tears streaming. "I knew if you doubted me, you'd walk away." David's face hardened. "And now I just might." The room fell into tense silence. Then quietly, David picked up his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, dialing. "Let them figure out who's lying." Layla lunged for the phone, but Sarah stepped in her way. A moment later, the call connected. The decision was made. Sirens approached in the distance. Layla collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Sarah turned away, fighting back tears of her own, of betrayal, loss, and something like pity. The truth would unravel in the days to come. Investigators would trace the blackmail, expose the twins' identity, and sort through Layla's involvement. David's public image would take a hit, but it would survive. Whether his marriage did only time would tell. But for now, the storm outside mirrored the one within, and none of their lives would ever be the same. Betrayal, scandal, and secret identities. This story proves that even the most powerful among us can be undone by hidden truths. In the end, David Harrington learned the hard way that wealth and influence can't shield you from the consequences of deception. Sarah, despite her heartbreak, found renewed strength in confronting the lies head-on rather than remaining a silent victim. As for Layla or Linda, her fate was sealed by the very illusions she spun, reminding us that the truth always finds a way to surface. if you were captivated by the twists, betrayals, and dramatic showdowns in this real-life saga. Help us shine more light on stories that need to be told. Like this video, share it with friends who love jaw-dropping drama, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can unravel even more astonishing tales lurking behind the polished veneers of the rich and the restless. He was her everything, the man she vowed to love in sickness and in health. But when she needed him most, when she was bringing their child into the world, he laughed. That single cruel sound shattered more than just her heart. It forged a will of iron. Fast forward 5 years. She's not the weeping woman he remembers. She's the master of a sprawling mansion, a self-made millionaire. And him. He's standing at her gates not as a husband, but as a guest about to learn the devastating price of a heartless laugh. This is the story of how a single moment of cruelty can change everything. The fluorescent lights of the delivery room hummed a monotonous, sterile tune, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of pain radiating through Amelia's body. Every muscle screamed, every nerve ending was a live wire. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her temples, and her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. For 17 hours she had been locked in this primal battle, her body a vessel for a miracle that felt more like a medieval torture session. Across the room, her husband, Richard, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his face a mask of bored impatience. He'd been supportive at first, holding her hand, whispering what he probably thought were encouraging words. But as the hours dragged on, his patience had worn thinner than the hospital-issued gown she wore. He'd started checking his phone, sighing dramatically, and making ill-timed jokes that fell flat in the tense air. Can you just rub my back? Please." Amelia gritted out her voice, barely a whisper. The pain was a relentless wave cresting higher and higher, and she felt like she was drowning. Richard looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Again, I just did that, honey. The nurse said it could still be a while. Please." She begged, the word tearing from her throat. It's really bad." With an exaggerated sigh, he pushed himself off the wall and shuffled over to her bedside. His touch was clumsy perfunctory, a far cry from the tender caresses he'd once showered her with. It was the touch of a man fulfilling an obligation, not a partner sharing in a profound, life-altering experience. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance straight out of a storybook. He was the charming, ambitious business major, and she was the bright-eyed art history student captivated by his confidence and grand plans. He'd promised her the world, a life of comfort and security, and for a while he'd delivered. They married a year after graduation, and he quickly climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious financial firm. Amelia, at his urging, had put her own career aspirations on hold to create the perfect home, to be the perfect corporate wife. She hosted his colleagues, remembered their birthdays, and smoothed over his social gaffes with her innate grace. She was the wind beneath his wings, a role she had accepted with love and devotion. Now, as another contraction seized her, a guttural cry escaped her lips. She squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white as she gripped the bed rails. I can't do this," she sobbed, the fear and exhaustion overwhelming her. "Don't be so dramatic, Amelia," Richard said, his voice laced with an unnerving detachment. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. It's natural." His words were a slap in the face. Natural. This agony felt anything but natural. It felt like her body was being torn asunder. She needed his strength, his compassion, his unwavering support. Instead, she got platitudes and a lecture on the history of childbirth. The doctor came in then, her expression calm but firm. "Okay, Amelia, it's time. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you've got." Summoning a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed, Amelia did as she was told. She pushed until stars exploded behind her eyelids, until her throat was raw from screaming. And then in a moment of sheer, blinding agony, she lost control. Her body convulsed, and a strange, involuntary sound, a mix between a groan and a grunt, erupted from deep within her. And that's when it happened. Richard laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, a nervous titter. It was a full-throated, unrestrained laugh, laced with a derisive edge that cut through the haze of her pain. He pointed at her, his face crinkled in amusement. "Did you hear that? You sound like a wild animal." Time seemed to stop. The hum of the lights, the encouraging words of the doctor, the frantic beating of her own heart, it all faded into a deafening silence. The only thing that existed in that moment was the sound of her husband's laughter, echoing in the sterile room, a cruel, mocking testament to her vulnerability. A profound and chilling clarity washed over Amelia. In that single, heart-shattering moment, the man she had loved, the man she had built her life around, ceased to exist. In his place stood a stranger, a man who could find humor in her suffering, who could mock her at her most primal, most exposed moment. The love she had so carefully nurtured for him, the years of sacrifice and unwavering support, all of it curdled into something cold and hard in her chest. A new kind of strength born, not of love, but of a chilling, resolute fury surged through her. With a final primal scream that had nothing to do with the pain of childbirth and everything to do with the birth of a new, unshakable resolve, she gave one last monumental push. And then the room was filled with the lusty cry of a newborn baby. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, her voice warm and congratulatory. They laid the tiny, wriggling creature on Amelia's chest, and as she looked into the impossibly dark eyes of her daughter, she made a silent, solemn vow. She would never again be in a position where she had to beg for comfort. She would never again allow herself to be made small by a man who saw her strength as a spectacle for his amusement. Richard, his laughter having subsided, stepped forward, a proud, fatherly smile now plastered on his face. "She's beautiful, Amelia, just like her mother." Amelia didn't look at him. She couldn't. The sight of him made her stomach turn. She just held her daughter, her tiny, perfect daughter, and whispered, "Hello, Olivia. It's just you and me now." The laughter had stopped, but for Amelia the echo of it would linger forever, a constant burning reminder of the moment her world broke apart, and the moment she began to piece it back together on her own terms. The love story was over. A story of survival, of revenge, of a woman's indomitable will to rise from the ashes of a shattered heart, was just beginning. The first few weeks at home were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant, overwhelming needs of a newborn. The sprawling suburban house that had once felt like a symbol of their success now felt like a gilded cage. The silence between Amelia and Richard was a tangible entity, a third person in their marriage, cold and unwelcome. Richard, for his part, seemed oblivious to the chasm that had opened between them. He played the role of the doting new father, posting endless photos of Olivia on social media, boasting to his friends and colleagues about his beautiful daughter. He'd come home from work, kiss Amelia on the cheek and ask in a perfunctory tone, "How was your day, honey?" Amelia would murmur a non-committal response, fine or tiring, her eyes never meeting his. The laughter in the delivery room had severed something vital between them, a cord of intimacy and trust that could never be reattached. She looked at him and saw not the father of her child, but a stranger who had mocked her at her most vulnerable. The memory was a festering wound, and his every touch, every casual endearment was like salt being rubbed into it. He tried to initiate intimacy to bridge the gap with physical affection, but Amelia would flinch away, feigning exhaustion or a headache. The truth was, his touch repulsed her. The memory of his laughing face was superimposed over every loving gesture, turning it into a grotesque parody. How could she share her body with a man who had treated her pain as a joke? The nights were the hardest. While Richard slept soundly beside her, his breathing even and untroubled, Amelia would lie awake, Olivia sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, and a cold, hard knot of anger would tighten in her stomach. She would replay the scene in the delivery room over and over in her mind, the sound of his laughter, a phantom echo that haunted the quiet hours of the night. It was in these dark, lonely hours that the seeds of her future began to germinate. She had given up her dreams for him, poured all her energy and creativity into building his world. And for what? To be ridiculed in her moment of greatest need, the anger she realized was a powerful fuel. It burned away the last vestiges of the naive, trusting woman she had once been, leaving in its place a steely resolve. One night, as the moon cast long shadows across the bedroom, she slipped out of bed and went to the nursery. She stood over Olivia's crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of her tiny chest. A fierce, protective love, more powerful than anything she had ever known, washed over her. She would build a world for this child, a world where she would never be dependent on the whims of a man, a world where she would be safe and secure. The next morning, something in Amelia had shifted. The fog of postpartum exhaustion had lifted, replaced by a crystalline clarity of purpose. While Olivia napped, she didn't scroll mindlessly through social media or watch daytime television. She went to her long-neglected home office, a space that had been more of a storage room for Richard's old college textbooks and sporting equipment than a place of work. She dusted off her old laptop, the one she'd used for her art history thesis, and the screen flickered to life, a beacon in the dim, cluttered room. Her fingers, at first hesitant, then with growing confidence, flew across the keyboard. She started researching, delving into the world of online businesses, e-commerce, and digital marketing. Her art history degree, which Richard had often dismissed as useless, had given her a keen eye for aesthetics, a deep understanding of historical trends, and a knack for storytelling. She realized she could leverage these skills in the digital marketplace. She started small, creating a curated online boutique selling vintage-inspired home decor. She used her art historian's eye to source unique, beautiful pieces from flea markets, estate sales, and obscure online vendors. She photographed each item with an artist's sensibility, staging them in her own home, creating a narrative around each piece. Her product descriptions were not just lists of dimensions and materials. They were stories weaving in the history and craftsmanship of each object. She named the boutique the Gilded Cage, a private, bitter joke that fueled her ambition. To the world, it was a chic, sophisticated brand. To her, it was a constant reminder of what she was fighting to escape. Richard barely noticed her new preoccupation. He saw her on her laptop and assumed she was playing on the internet, as he dismissively called it. He was too consumed with his own world, his own career, to pay much attention to his wife's little hobby. The first sale came a month later, a modest purchase of a set of antique teacups. Amelia watched the notification pop up on her screen, her heart pounding with a thrill she hadn't felt in years. It was a small victory, but it was hers, and it was a taste of the independence she craved. The sales started to trickle in, then flow. Her keen eye for trends, her elegant branding, and her compelling storytelling resonated with a growing audience. She reinvested every penny she made back into the business, expanding her inventory, upgrading her website, and learning everything she could about search engine optimization and social media marketing. She worked in the stolen hours of the day while Olivia slept, or in the dead of night while Richard snored beside her. The house was her warehouse, the garage her shipping department. She was a one-woman army, fueled by coffee ambition and a burning desire to prove him wrong. One evening, Richard came home from work, tossing his briefcase onto the sofa with a weary sigh. "Tough day at the office," he announced, loosening his tie. "The market's in a slump. We lost a major client." Amelia, who was in the midst of packaging an order for a hand-painted Italian vase, looked up, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. His world of high finance, which had once seemed so important, so all-consuming, now felt distant and insignificant. "That's a shame," she said, her voice neutral. She sealed the box with packing tape, the sound a crisp, definitive rip in the quiet room. He looked at her, then a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He noticed, perhaps for the first time, the stacks of boxes in the corner, the meticulous organization of her workspace. "You're still doing this thing?" he asked, a hint of condescension in his tone. "Are you actually making any money from it?" Amelia met his gaze, her own eyes cool and steady. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She printed the shipping label and affixed it to the box. In that moment, she wasn't just a wife and mother. She was a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, the silent architect of a new life, a life that was slowly but surely diverging from his. And he, in his arrogance and self-absorption, was completely oblivious to the fact that the foundations of his world were beginning to crumble. The gilded cage was about to be broken open, not by force, but by the quiet, relentless work of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The next 2 years passed in a whirlwind of dual realities. To Richard, life continued on its predictable, comfortable trajectory. He went to the office, he played golf on the weekends, he attended PTA meetings where he'd charm the other parents with his easy smile and confident demeanor. He saw Amelia as the dutiful wife, the devoted mother, the woman who kept his home running like a well-oiled machine. He noticed she was on her laptop more often, that the garage was becoming increasingly cluttered with boxes, but he dismissed it as a harmless, time-filling hobby. He was the breadwinner, the one whose career mattered, the one who provided for their family. Her little online shop was in his mind, a quaint diversion, something to keep her busy while he conquered the world of finance. He was living in a world of his own, making a comfortable illusion that was about to be spectacularly shattered. Amelia's world, in contrast, was a hive of activity, a parallel universe humming with the energy of creation and commerce. The gilded cage had exploded. What had started as a small, curated collection of vintage home decor had morphed into a full-fledged lifestyle brand. Amelia had expanded into artisanal furniture, handcrafted textiles, and a line of organic small-batch candles and soaps. Her eye for quality, her impeccable taste, and her genius for marketing had tapped into a zeitgeist of consumers hungry for authenticity and beauty. She was no longer a one-woman army. She had a small, dedicated team of remote employees, a customer service representative, a social media manager, and a logistics coordinator. The garage had been abandoned in favor of a rented warehouse space, and the hum of her laptop had been replaced by the constant ping of new orders, emails from suppliers, and messages from her growing team. She had become a master of compartmentalization. During the day, she was mum taking Olivia to the park, arranging playdates and reading bedtime stories. But the moment Olivia was asleep, she transformed into the CEO of her burgeoning empire, a sharp, savvy businesswoman who negotiated contracts, analyzed sales data, and made high-stakes decisions with a cool head and an iron will. The money, at first a trickle, had become a torrent. She had opened a separate bank account, a secret ledger of her success. She watched the numbers climb with a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about the luxury, it was about the freedom. Each dollar was a brick in the fortress she was building around herself and her daughter, a fortress that Richard, with his casual cruelty and oblivious arrogance, would never be able to penetrate. The first crack in Richard's carefully constructed reality appeared on a Tuesday evening. He came home from work, complaining about a deal that had gone south, and tossed a stack of mail onto the kitchen counter. Bills, bills, and more bills, he grumbled. The cost of everything is going up. Amelia, who was calmly sipping a cup of tea, glanced at the mail. On top of the pile was a thick, glossy magazine, a high-end publication dedicated to interior design and entrepreneurship. On the cover, in a stunning, professionally shot photograph, was a woman with dark hair, a serene smile, and eyes that held a universe of secrets. It was her. The headline in bold, elegant font read, "Amelia Sterling, the silent titan of e-commerce, turns vintage charm into a multi-million-dollar empire." Richard stared at the cover, his mouth slightly agape. He picked it up as if it were a strange, alien object. He looked from the photograph to his wife, who was watching him with a calm, unreadable expression. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "It's a magazine," Amelia replied, her voice even. "They did a feature on the Gilded Cage." A feature he stammered, flipping through the pages to the lavish multi-page spread. There were photographs of her products, testimonials from ecstatic customers, and a detailed account of her business's meteoric rise. The article lauded her as a visionary, a marketing genius, a woman who had single-handedly built a brand that was redefining the landscape of online retail. It mentioned her multi-million-dollar empire. Richard sank into a chair, the magazine spread out on the table before him. He read the words, but they didn't seem to compute. Multi-million-dollar empire. This was his wife, the woman who organized his sock drawer and reminded him of his mother's birthday. How could she be this titan? I don't understand, he said, looking up at her, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. When did this happen? It's been happening for a while, Richard. Amelia said, her voice devoid of any emotion. You just weren't paying attention. His mind reeled. The late nights on her laptop, the endless stream of packages, the hushed phone calls he'd overheard, it all clicked into place, forming a picture he had been too self-absorbed to see. He had been living with a stranger, a woman who had built an entirely separate life, a wildly successful life, right under his nose. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him, shock, confusion, and a bitter, resentful jealousy. He had always been the successful one, the one with the high-powered career. The unspoken agreement in their marriage was that he was the star, and she was the supporting cast. Now the roles had been dramatically, irrevocably reversed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice rising. It wasn't a question born of genuine hurt. It was an accusation, a protest against this sudden, unwelcome shift in their power dynamic. Amelia took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea before answering. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. She saw not a partner, but an obstacle. A man whose ego was so fragile that her success was a threat to his identity. "Tell you what, Richard?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "That I was building a future for myself and our daughter, that I was creating a life where I would never have to depend on a man who could laugh at me in my moment of greatest pain. I didn't think you'd be interested." The mention of the delivery room, a topic that had been buried under years of silence, hung in the air between them, a toxic, radioactive cloud. Richard flinched, as if he'd been struck. He had no defense, no comeback. He had laughed. It was a fact, an indelible stain on their history. And in that moment, he realized that he had not only lost his wife's love, but he had also lost her respect. And in the face of her quiet, formidable success, he felt a new, unfamiliar emotion. Fear. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. His world, the one he had so carefully constructed, was beginning to feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. And the hurricane had a name, Amelia Sterling. The magazine article was not just a revelation. It was a cataclysm. The carefully maintained facade of the Sterling family life crumbled overnight, exposing the deep, irreparable fissures beneath. Richard, once the undisputed king of his castle, found himself a bewildered and increasingly irrelevant figure in a world that was being reshaped by his wife's silent, relentless ambition. He tried to reclaim his position, to insert himself into her success. "We should celebrate," he declared a few days after the magazine came out. His voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "I'll book a table at Le Ciel. Tell all our friends. We can make it a party for the Gilded Cage." Amelia looked up from her laptop, where she was finalizing a deal with a high-end hotel chain to furnish their boutique suites. "There's nothing for us to celebrate Richard," she said, her tone cool and dismissive. "This is my company." The "we" in their marriage had become a "you" and a "me," two separate entities with diverging paths. Richard's attempts to co-opt her success were clumsy and transparent. He started name-dropping the Gilded Cage at his office, trying to bask in the reflected glory of her achievements. "My wife, the entrepreneur," he'd say, a proprietary pride in his voice that made Amelia's skin crawl. But the world saw the truth. The magazine story had made Amelia a minor celebrity in the business world. Invitations to speak at conferences, to join exclusive networking groups, to sit on advisory boards poured in. They were addressed to Ms. Amelia Sterling, not Mrs. Richard Sterling. He was a footnote in her story, a detail from her past, not a partner in her present. The financial disparity between them became a chasm. While Richard's career in finance was respectable, it was bound by the traditional structures of salary and bonuses. Amelia's income was exponential, a force of nature that was rewriting their financial landscape. The tipping point came 6 months after the article was published. Amelia called a meeting, not in their sterile, silent living room, but in the sleek, minimalist boardroom of her new corporate headquarters, a stunning, light-filled space in a trendy downtown loft building. Richard arrived feeling like an outsider in his own life. He was ushered into the boardroom by Amelia's personal assistant, a sharp, efficient young woman who looked at him with a polite but distant professionalism. Amelia was already there, seated at the head of a long, polished concrete table. She was dressed in a tailored, power red dress, her hair swept back in an elegant chignon. She looked formidable, a woman in complete command of her world. "Richard, thank you for coming," she said, her voice formal, as if addressing a business associate. "Amelia, what is this?" he asked, gesturing around the impressive room. "Why are we here?" She slid a thick folder across the table towards him. "I'm buying a new house," she announced, her voice even. "And I'm filing for divorce." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Divorce. The thought had crossed his mind in fleeting moments of anger and frustration, but he had never truly believed it would happen. He was Richard Sterling. People didn't divorce him. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were the legal documents, cold and official, and a glossy real estate brochure. The property featured was not a house. It was an estate. A sprawling, contemporary mansion nestled in the most exclusive, secluded enclave in the state, overlooking the ocean. It was a palace of glass and steel, with an infinity pool that seemed to melt into the horizon, a private cinema, a wine cellar, and acres of meticulously landscaped gardens. It was a world away from their comfortable but ultimately unremarkable suburban home. You're buying this," he stammered, the scale of her wealth, of her ambition, finally hitting him with its full, crushing weight. "I've already bought it," she corrected him. "The sale closed last week. I paid in cash." Cash. The word hung in the air, a testament to the vast, unbridgeable gulf that now separated them. His entire net worth would barely cover the property taxes on a place like this. "And the divorce?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What about Olivia?" "The terms are all in there," Amelia said, gesturing to the legal documents. "They are, I believe you'll find, exceptionally generous. I'm not asking for a cent from you. I will, of course, have full custody of Olivia. You will have visitation rights, every other weekend, and alternating holidays." Every other weekend. The words were a death sentence to his vision of family, of fatherhood. He would be a visitor in his own daughter's life. "You can't do this, Amelia," he pleaded, the bluster and arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, desperate fear. "We're a family." Amelia's mask of cool professionalism finally cracked, and for a fleeting moment he saw the woman he had married, the woman whose heart he had broken. Her eyes blazed with a fire that had been smoldering for 5 long years. "A family," she repeated, her voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "Where was this family when I was screaming in pain, bringing our daughter into the world? And you were laughing at me. Where was this family when I was up all night, building a future for our child? While you slept oblivious. You didn't want a family, Richard. You wanted an audience. You wanted a support system for your own ego. You just never realized that the person holding up the stage was the one with the real strength." She stood up, the meeting clearly over. "The movers will be at the house next week. They will pack your belongings and deliver them to an apartment I have leased for you downtown. It's fully furnished. You'll be comfortable." She was managing his exit from her life with the same ruthless efficiency with which she ran her business. He was being downsized, outsourced, made redundant. "So that's it?" he asked, a hollow feeling spreading through his chest. "I'm just dismissed." Amelia walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city, her back to him. "No, Richard," she said, her voice softer now, laced with a weary finality. "You're not dismissed. You're a guest. You will be a guest at Olivia's birthday parties, a guest at her school plays, a guest in the life we have built without you. You are welcome to visit. but you don't live here anymore." He left the boardroom in a tool, the heavy folder clutched in his hand. As he walked through the bustling open-plan office of the Gilded Cage, he saw the vibrant creative energy, the collaborative spirit, the world his wife had built. It was a world that had no place for him. He had laughed at her in her moment of weakness, and in doing so he had rendered himself obsolete in her moment of strength. He was no longer her husband, no longer her partner. He was about to become a guest in the magnificent, sprawling mansion of her success, a solitary figure rattling around in the empty echo chamber of his own regrets. The laughter had finally truly stopped, and the silence that followed was the sound of his world ending. The mansion was even more breathtaking and more alienating in person. The first time Richard drove his sensible sedan up the long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees and manicured lawns, he felt a profound sense of dislocation. His car seemed comically out of place, parked next to Amelia's sleek black Tesla in the cavernous four-car garage. A housekeeper, a polite uniformed woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Gable, greeted him at the door. "Sterling and Olivia are by the pool," she informed him, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "Please make yourself at home." But how could he make himself at home in a place that felt more like a modern art museum than a house? The ceilings soared to impossible heights. The walls were vast expanses of white, punctuated by large, dramatic canvases of abstract art. The furniture was minimalist and exquisitely expensive, each piece a statement of taste and wealth he couldn't begin to comprehend. He walked through the echoing open-plan living space, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the polished concrete floors. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser in this new rarefied world his wife and daughter now inhabited. He found them by the infinity pool, a shimmering sheet of blue that seemed to stretch into the endless expanse of the ocean beyond. Olivia, now a bubbly, bright-eyed 6-year-old, shrieked with delight as she splashed in the shallow end. Amelia was reclining on a lounge chair, reading a book, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. She looked serene, untouchable, a goddess in her own private paradise. "Daddy!" Olivia cried, her face lighting up as she saw him. She scrambled out of the pool and ran into his arms, dripping water all over his work clothes. He hugged her tightly, burying his face in her wet hair, a surge of love and loss washing over him. This at least was real. This connection was the one thing he hadn't completely destroyed. "Hi, Pumpkin," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia looked up from her book, a cool, polite smile on her face. "Richard," she said, her voice carrying easily in the still air. "You're early." It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't a welcome either. It was a simple statement of fact. He was a visitor, and his arrival was a scheduled event. His weekends with Olivia became the focal point of his life, but they were always tinged with the bitterness of his new reality. He would pick her up from the mansion, a place where he was always greeted with polite deference, but never with warmth. He would take her to his small, sterile apartment, a place that felt temporary and soulless compared to the vibrant, love-filled world she inhabited with her mother. He tried to be the fun dad, taking her to amusement parks, zoos, and museums. He bought her expensive toys, hoping to buy her affection to compete with the sheer scale of the life Amelia provided. But Olivia, with the simple, unerring wisdom of a child, didn't care about the money. She just wanted her parents. "Why can't you live here with us, Daddy?" she asked one evening as he was tucking her into her bed in the guest room of the mansion, a room that was larger and more luxuriously appointed than his entire apartment. The question was a knife in his heart. It's complicated, sweetie," he stammered, unable to meet her innocent, questioning gaze. How could he explain that he had forfeited his right to live here with a single heartless laugh? How could he tell his daughter that he had failed her mother in the most fundamental way? He started to see Amelia not just as the woman who had left him, but as the woman she had become. He attended Olivia's school events, sitting a few rows behind Amelia, watching her interact with the other parents and teachers. She was confident, gracious, and deeply involved in her daughter's life. The other mothers looked up to her, admired her. The fathers were a little in awe of her, a little intimidated. She moved through the world with an effortless grace and power that he had never seen in her before. One day he arrived to pick up Olivia and found Amelia in her home office, a stunning glass-walled room that overlooked the ocean. She was on a video call, her voice firm and decisive as she negotiated the terms of an international distribution deal. He stood in the doorway, unseen, and listened. She was brilliant. The shy, accommodating art history student he had married was gone, replaced by this formidable, razor-sharp CEO. A sickening realization dawned on him. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the opportunity to be a partner to this incredible woman. He had been so blinded by his own ego, so convinced of his own superiority, that he had never truly seen her. He had seen a reflection of himself, a supporting character in his own story. He had never seen the Titan hiding in plain sight. The final crushing blow came on Olivia's 7th birthday. Amelia had thrown a lavish party, a fairy tale affair with a real pony, a magician, and a mountain of presents. Richard arrived, a brightly wrapped gift in his hand, feeling more like a distant relative than a father. He watched from the sidelines as Amelia and Olivia, both dressed in flowing white dresses, moved through the party, the twin centers of this happy, sun-drenched universe. They laughed together, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed in the vast open spaces of the mansion. Later, as the guests were leaving, he found Amelia in the kitchen overseeing the cleanup. "It was a beautiful party," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. "Olivia had a wonderful time." "Amelia," he began, his voice cracking. I am so sorry." She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Sorry for what, Richard? For laughing? Or for not believing in me?" "For everything." He whispered the word, a confession of 1,000 small and large sins. "For not being the man you deserved. For not being the father Olivia deserved. I was a fool. I see that now." Amelia was silent for a long moment, studying his face. The anger in her eyes had long since faded, replaced by something that looked almost like pity. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were. But your apology, Richard, it doesn't change anything. You can't unring a bell. You can't unhear a laugh. I built this life, this world, for my daughter, not out of spite, but to protect her, to protect myself. I have no anger left for you. I simply have no space for you, not in the way you want." She turned back to the counter, her movements calm and deliberate. The conversation was over. He walked out of the mansion and into the cool night air. He got into his sensible car and drove away, the lights of the house receding in his rearview mirror until they were just another star in the night sky. He was Richard Sterling, the man who had it all and threw it away with a single cruel laugh. He was a guest in his daughter's life, a ghost haunting the hallways of his wife's success. And as he drove into the darkness, the only sound was the echo of his own regret. a hollow, lonely sound that would follow him for the rest of his days. He had laughed when she cried, and now he was left with nothing but the silence. Another decade passed, and the world Amelia had built became an institution. The gilded cage was no longer just a brand. It was a global phenomenon, a benchmark for taste and aspirational living. Amelia Sterling herself was a household name, a subject of business school case studies, and a frequent though reluctant presence on lists of the world's most influential women. The mansion, once a symbol of her newfound freedom, had become her fortress, a sanctuary of serene, controlled perfection overlooking the turbulent ocean. Richard, too, had settled into a new, quieter existence. The 10 years had carved new lines on his face and stripped away the last vestiges of his youthful arrogance. He had left the high-pressure world of finance, finding a more modest and meaningful career as a financial advisor for a non-profit organization, helping families navigate debt and plan for their futures. He lived in the same comfortable, unremarkable apartment, a space that now felt less like a temporary stopgap and more like a home. The weekends he spent with his daughter were the unshakable pillars of his life. He never missed a single one. He was a constant, steady presence, a quiet counterpoint to the dazzling, high-powered world her mother provided. He was not the fun dad anymore. He was the listening dad, the one she called with homework questions, the one who taught her how to drive in his sensible sedan, the one whose silence was comfortable, not menacing. The fulcrum of their separate worlds was Olivia. At 17, she was a striking mix of her parents. She had Amelia's dark hair and thoughtful eyes, but Richard's easy smile and quick wit. She had grown up navigating the two starkly different realities of her parents' lives. She spent weekdays in the minimalist splendor of the mansion, a world of organic meals, private tutors, and curated experiences. On weekends, she was in Richard's world, a world of take-out pizza old movies and long, meandering conversations in the local park. She loved both her parents fiercely, but she was a child of the armistice born after the war was over, and she had never truly understood the reason for the profound, unbreachable treaty of silence that governed their interactions. The first crack in the carefully constructed piece appeared not with a bang, but with a college application essay. The prompt was deceptively simple. Describe a formative event in your life and how it has shaped your character. Olivia, a gifted student with a bright future, found herself staring at a blank screen. Her life from the outside seemed devoid of the kind of dramatic, character-forging events that make for compelling essays. It had been a life of privilege, of protection, of seamless comfort. The most significant event she could think of was her parents' divorce. But she had been too young to remember the cause, and the official story she'd been given, that they had simply grown apart, felt thin and unsatisfying. Driven by a nascent journalistic curiosity and the pressing deadline, she began to dig. In the vast digital archives of the internet, she found what she was looking for. It wasn't the famous magazine article about her mother's success. It was an older, obscure blog post, a "Where Are They Now" piece on some of the city's up-and-coming financiers from over a decade ago. The article on Richard mentioned his recent quiet divorce and contained a quote from an anonymous hospital source who recalled the dramatic birth of his daughter. The source recounted the story of a young, arrogant financier who had laughed loudly and mockingly at his wife during the height of her labor. Olivia read the words, and the world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face. Laughed. Her father, her kind, patient, gentle father, had laughed at her mother while she was giving birth to her. It couldn't be true. It was just anonymous gossip. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, sickening sense of certainty settled in her gut. It was the missing piece, the skeleton key that unlocked all the mysteries of her family. Her mother's impenetrable reserve, her father's quiet, almost penitent demeanor, the palpable, invisible wall that stood between them, even during the most cordial of handoffs. The gilded cage she had lived in her entire life suddenly felt fragile, its bars forged not just from her mother's strength, but from a deep foundational wound. She didn't confront her mother. The thought of bringing this ugly, buried thing to the surface, of causing her mother to relive that moment, was unbearable. Instead, she did what any 17-year-old in crisis might do. She rebelled, not in any spectacular headline-grabbing way. Her rebellion was quiet, insidious, and aimed at the heart of the perfection her mother had curated. Her grades, once stellar, began to slip. She became withdrawn, sarcastic, her easy smile replaced by a guarded, cynical pout. She started spending more time with a rebellious art house crowd from school, returning to the mansion late, her clothes smelling faintly of smoke, her eyes holding a new defiant glint. Amelia, a woman who could anticipate market trends and deftly navigate hostile corporate takeovers, was completely blindsided by the insurgency in her own home. She tried to handle it as she handled everything with control and logic. She scheduled meetings with Olivia's teachers, hired a new academic advisor, and tried to have calm, rational conversations with her daughter that went nowhere. "What's wrong, Olivia?" Amelia would ask, her voice laced with a frustration she tried to conceal. "If you need help, you just have to tell me." "Nothing's wrong," Olivia would reply, her gaze fixed on her phone. "I'm fine." The breaking point came when the headmaster of Olivia's exclusive private school called. He was deeply concerned about Olivia's sudden change in behavior and her academic decline. He wanted a meeting with both of her parents. The request sent a jolt of panic through Amelia. A meeting with Richard, not a brief exchange in the driveway, but a formal sit-down conference about their daughter's well-being. It was a scenario her fortress was not designed to handle. They met in the headmaster's oak-paneled office, the air thick with unspoken history. They sat in adjacent chairs, a foot of empty space between them that felt like a mile-wide canyon. Richard looked older, Amelia thought, but his eyes were clear and steady. He looked at her not with regret or longing, but with a simple, shared concern. The headmaster laid out the situation, his words painting a picture of a girl who was adrift, who was sabotaging herself. "She seems to be carrying a heavy burden," he concluded, looking from Amelia to Richard. "And she is pushing away anyone who tries to help." After the meeting, they walked in a silence to the parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. "I think I know what this is about," Richard said, finally, his voice low. Amelia stopped her car keys in her hand. "What are you talking about?" "She found out," he said, his gaze unwavering. "About the delivery room, about what I did." Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The one secret she had tried to shield her daughter from the ugly foundation upon which her empire was built was out. "How?" she whispered. "I don't know how. But I know my daughter. This kind of pain, this kind of anger, it has a source. And we," he said the word we, feeling foreign and strange, "are the source." For the first time in 16 years, Amelia felt the fortress walls begin to crumble. She had built a world to protect her daughter from the kind of pain and humiliation she had suffered, but in doing so, she had created a new kind of prison, a sterile environment where a wound like this could fester in silence. Her control, her greatest asset, had become her greatest liability. "What do we do?" she asked the question, an admission of defeat. She, the titan of industry, was asking for help from the man she had cast out of her life. "We can't fix this for her," Richard said, his voice imbued with a quiet wisdom she had never heard from him before. "But we can stop letting the past control the present. We can show her that people can change, that wounds can heal, even if they leave scars. We have to talk to her. Together." That evening, Richard didn't leave. Amelia, in a move that felt both terrifying and necessary, asked him to stay for dinner. They sat at the long, imposing dining table, the three of them, in a silence that was different from the ones that had come before. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with unspoken words waiting to be released. It was Olivia who finally broke it. "I read about it," she said, her voice small but clear, not looking at either of them. "Online. What happened when I was born?" Amelia reached for her daughter's hand, but Olivia pulled it away. Richard took a deep breath. "It's true, Olivia," he said, his voice raw with an ancient shame. "I did a cruel and unforgivable thing. I was a weak, arrogant boy who didn't know how to be a man, a husband, or a father. And your mother responded with a strength I couldn't comprehend. The life she built for you, this house, everything. It was her answer to my weakness." He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled not with the ghosts of their dead love, but with a profound, hard-won respect. "I have spent 17 years trying to become a man worthy of being your father. I have never for 1 second stopped being sorry for what I did." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. They were not tears of anger anymore, but of a wrenching, confusing sorrow. Amelia felt her own tears welling. She looked at Richard, the guest, the stranger, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. He was not the boy who had laughed. He was the man who had spent nearly 2 decades in quiet atonement. "He's right, Liv," Amelia said, her voice thick. "I built these walls so high to keep the pain out. I never realized I was also locking you inside with it. We have to find a way to talk about this. All of it." It was not a resolution. It was not a happy ending. The damage of that single cruel laugh could never be fully undone. But as the three of them sat at the table, the truth finally exposed to the light. The thick, unbreachable wall between them began to dissolve. The guest in the mansion had, for the first time, been invited in, not as a husband or a lover, but as a father, a partner in the messy, complicated, and necessary work of healing their daughter. The gilded cage was still standing, but for the first time, its door was open. The story of Amelia and Richard is a raw, unflinching look at how a single moment of disrespect can shatter a relationship and forge an empire. It's a testament to the quiet strength that can be born from profound pain. Amelia's journey from a heartbroken wife to a self-made millionaire isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back her power, her identity, and her future. Richard's fate serves as a chilling reminder that our actions, especially towards those we claim to love, have consequences that can last a lifetime. What do you think? Was Amelia's transformation justified? Could Richard ever truly be redeemed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think.